So during the second night of Thursday, it was Wednesday and Thursday. During the second night on Thursday, June 27th, 2019, Democratic presidential candidate debate, many people are talking about Senator Kamala Harris, Democrat from California, attacking Vice President Joe Biden over busing, a 40-year-old busing policy, and working with quote-unquote segregationists when he was in the U.S. Senate. She says she wanted to talk about race as the only black person on stage. Now, she's being attacked. You have you have a social media campaign attacking her ethnicity and saying she's not black. Her mother is from India. Her father's Jamaican. She is black. But black and a black consciousness are two different things. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is black, but he lacks a black consciousness. And one of the arguments that has been going on for months with Senator Kamala Harris is that even though she's black, sometimes it seems like she's only black when it's convenient. So on stage, Kamala Harris says she wanted to talk about race as the only black person on stage. So I thought she was going to talk about reparations since the H.R. 40 hearing was the week before on Wednesday, June 19th. I thought she was going to talk about the fact that Senator Joe Biden has not endorsed H.R. 40. Now, he supports the gathering of evidence and dealing with the legacy of slavery and things like this, but he has not come out formally endorsed H.R. 40. So I thought she was going to talk about that. Or I thought she was going to talk about her black agenda. Because when she was talking to black people on the Tom Joyner Morning Show with Tom Joyner and Sybil Wilkes and Roland Martin, she said that she would have a black agenda, and she talked about the need for a black agenda, and she said that all of the candidates should have a black agenda. So I thought she was going to talk about her black agenda. When she was on the Breakfast Club, she talked about she would have a black agenda. When she's talking about listening to Tupac and all this stuff, she was talking about the need for a black agenda. So when she talked about she wanted to talk about race and she's the only black person on stage, I thought either she was going to talk about reparations, which impacts black people, African Americans, or I thought she was going to talk about her black agenda because she said she would have one. But then she attacked Biden on his position on busing over 40 years ago. Now, when the hell was the last time you heard African Americans talk about the need for more busing? Because one, busing was a failed program. Two, most African Americans were against busing. This is something that was not talked about that night. This is something she didn't want to mention. Most African Americans were against busing. So let's look at the article. I'm going to give you some of these articles here so you can go do this research, right? Because we can't be hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, and run amok. So look at the article from, let's see. Okay, this one here from the Washington Post. Biden takes flack on race and busing, but his views may still mirror America's. Biden takes flack on race and busing, but his views may still mirror America. Mirror America's. This is from June 28th, 2019, Washington Post. It talks about how the year that Joe Biden entered the U.S. Senate in 1973, Gallup did a poll and asked Americans whether they thought busing children from one neighborhood to another was the best means of integrating the nation's public schools. 5% of those surveyed said they favored that approach. 5% of those surveyed. Broken into racial groups, 4% are whites, and only 9% of African Americans say they supported busing. Most African Americans were totally against busing. But that didn't come up. But see, once again, this deals with a black consciousness. Because if you got a black consciousness, you understand that the real fight for Brown versus Board of Education was over resources. We wanted equal funding for our schools in our communities, like white people have for their schools in their community. Now, yes, you should be able to go to the state institution. Yes, you should be able to go, if you got to pass 3-4 white schools to walk 10 miles to a black one, we should be able to go to the one closer to your home. But the real fight was over resources, not busing. That's not what we wanted. We wanted our children to be able to go to school in our neighborhoods where we knew teachers were there who lived in our communities. Our parents grew up with the teachers. Those teachers went to our grocery stores. They went to our churches, okay? And those teachers loved them. We wanted equal resources. We didn't want dilapidated schools. We didn't want old, outdated textbooks that were hand-me-downs from the white schools. We were fighting for equal resources. We weren't fighting for busing. And when you look at the statistics today, and this morning on David Gurr's show, David Gurr, MSNBC, they talked about this, and they talked about how the schools are more segregated today than ever. Busing is a failed program. So I thought she was going to talk about reparations or a black agenda, but she wanted to talk about a 40-year-old busing policy when most black people were against busing. But this is the difference between being black and having a black consciousness. So what she didn't tell us was that most African Americans in the 1970s were against busing, as the Gallup poll showed. All right. So she talked about how hurt she was that Joe Biden would praise segregationists who worked against busing and would not want her in the U.S. Senate. But what she didn't tell you is that the 2 U.S. senators that Joe Biden talked about were 2 Southern segregationists who were Democrats. He's talking about being able to work with people that you vehemently disagree with and get bills passed. Just like Senator Kamala Harris and Cory Booker had to work with Donald Trump to get the First Step Act passed that they keep talking about. And they vehemently disagree with Trump. Trump is a Republican. Biden is talking about having to work with these guys who were Democrats. And this is what people don't want to talk about. Reverend Al Sharpton is not saying this. Cory Booker is not saying this. Senator Kamala Harris, when she had a little dramatic Academy Award winning speech Thursday night, they're not saying Biden was talking about working with Democrats who he disagreed with. But then he also said he ran against the segregationists and defeated them. Okay, so I want to go to this clip here. This is from PoliticsNation, MSNBC. Oh, no, this is from MSNBC. Reverend Al Sharpton interviewed him, but it wasn't PoliticsNation. This is from June 23rd, 2019. The name of this clip this is Exhibit A. This is Exhibit A. The name of this clip is Joe Biden responds to controversy over his comments about segregationists. This is before the debate, okay? I talked about this clip last Sunday, but I don't think I played it, all right? Let's go to this clip.
During the Obama years, fight, even sometimes internal fights in the staff for same-sex marriage and a lot of tough stuff. And you and I disagreed in the 90s, and I said, wow, this Biden is a real go-to-the-mat kind of fighter. And this week you got into it about a statement you made about racists and segregationists. And don't you understand some of the hurt feelings there? You call Cory Booker.
Sure I do.
And you have Mayor de Blasio and others calling you to apologize. Many things I've said that I didn't intend, Mrs. King said to me, you can't say things that hurt people. It hurts when you talk about boy. It means something different to us. It hurts when you call a racist like you normalize. That's not the Biden I got to know. Don't you understand that?
No, I do fully understand. That's not what I said, though. They didn't print the whole deal. You know what I mean? The context of this was totally different. And by the way, the fact of the matter is, I ran against all those folks. I got on the Judiciary Committee to defeat the man who headed the committee. I'm the guy that extended the Voting Rights Act 25 years, not 5. We finally got to the point when I was a senior member of the Democratic on the Judiciary Committee to get 98 votes to extend the Voting Rights Act. Let me tell you something. You got to deal with what's in front of you. And what was in front of you was a bunch of racists, and we had to defeat them. And as I said in that statement, that the fact of the matter is the meanest man in the world I've ever dealt with in the United States Senate was a guy from Georgia named Herman Talmadge. And I included Jim Eastland. But this is, I do understand the consequence of the word boy. But it wasn't said in any of that context at all.
But you understand, they would call you son. They would never call me son. They would only call me boy.
No, but they called Teddy Kennedy boy. That was the distinction. The reason he called me senator is to demean me more because son, because he said, I'm not even qualified to be in the Senate. I'm not old enough. I'm a kid. I'm a kid.
To those that are listening,
Okay, so this is Joe Biden explaining this to Sharpton last Sunday. I talked about this last Sunday on my show. This is on MSNBC. So why do people act like they have amnesia or can't understand English? The whole context of what Biden was saying. And now, if you disagree with Biden on actual policies, votes he took, things like that, okay, that's fine. But we can't mischaracterize what people say, especially when you got 18 million people watching live on MSNBC and 9 million streaming on the internet. And this was what took place. He's explaining to the Sharp. He said, wait a second. Now, for those that don't know, Senator Ted Kennedy was white. He's saying they called Senator Ted Kennedy boy. And he said Senator James Eastland specifically called me son. This ain't had nothing to do with black men being called boys, as Cory Booker was talking about how he was so hurt. This little cream puff talking about he's so hurt over the usage of the word boy. You talk about you live in the hood and you so hurt over the usage of the word boy. That's not even what this was about. Biden was talking about being able to work with people he totally disagreed with to get bills passed. And these two guys were Democrats. So what, he not going to work with Democrats? And he's talking about, I defeated the racists also. But he was talking about how he was called son because Senator James Eastland, Democrat from Mississippi, who was known as the mouth of the white South, didn't think Biden was old enough to be in the Senate. That's why he called him son. This didn't have anything to do with black men being called boy. But people wanted to interject this into the conversation. And that's not even what it was about, and totally mischaracterized. So if we look at the article from Politico.com, this is one of the first articles that dealt with all of this. June 19th, 2019, from Politico.com, entitled Biden's 2020 Rivals Condemn Remarks About Segregationists. Biden's 2020 Rivals Condemn Remarks About Segregationists. This is Exhibit B, okay? And I guess the video I just played is Exhibit C. And we got Exhibit D coming up in a minute here. But an excerpt from this article says Biden cited the late Senators James Eastland of Mississippi and Herman Talmadge of Georgia at a fundraiser in New York on Tuesday night to back up his claim that one of his greatest strengths was to bring people together. Now, he wasn't praising these segregationists, as people mischaracterize him saying. He wasn't praising these segregationists. He said, quote, I was in a caucus with James O. Eastland, okay? And he said this briefly imitating the senator's southern drawl, according to poll reports. He said, quote, he never called me boy. He always called me son. Now, he's told that story before, and he said that previously he said he never called me senator. He called me son. But this is what he's talking about in this context. He called, now you had the other senator from Georgia, Senator Herman Talmadge from Georgia, another segregationist Dixiecrat. He called Herman Talmadge one of the meanest guys he ever knew, but said, quote, at least there was some civility. We got things done, end quote. What he was talking about in the broader context is that in the Senate, even though you totally disagreed with people and didn't like them, you could still work with people and get bills passed. This is what he's talking about. He's comparing that to the Senate today, where the Republicans largely look at the Democrats as the enemy, and the Democrats largely look at the Republicans as the enemy, and it's much harder to get bills passed. This is the context that he's talking about. Okay, he's not talking. He talked about how he was against the segregationists, but you could at least get bills passed. But the two segregationists he's talking about are Democrats, and nobody wants to say, wait a second, he's talking about working with Democrats. He went on to say in the article from Politico, quote, we didn't agree on much of anything, but today you look at the other side, referring to Republicans, and you're the enemy. We don't talk to each other anymore. This is what he's talking about. So he said he knew many people in his party thought that his attitude made him too, quote unquote, old fashioned to be the Democratic nominee to take on Donald Trump in 2020. He said, well, guess what? If you can't reach a consensus in our system, what happens? It encourages and demands the abuse of power by our president. Now, Senator Kamala Harris was on Morning Joe the following morning, and she was interviewed by a panel. She talked about how she worked with Paul Ryan, who's a Republican, who she disagrees with on a lot of things to get things done. But then she talked about Biden praising segregation. He wasn't praising segregationists. The whole argument is mischaracterizing what he said. So let's go into this deeper. Many people accuse Senator Kamala Harris of being black only when it's convenient. This has been going on for months. This didn't just start with this attack a couple of days ago. When she became Attorney General in California, now she is black. I said this from the beginning. She is black. Her father is from Jamaica. Her mother is from India. She is black. But so is Clarence Thomas. There's a difference between being black via ancestry and black as far as thinking, a consciousness. So when she became Attorney General in California, she was called Indian American, as many of the headlines at the time described her. On Friday, Joe Biden was speaking at an Operation Push dinner. He defended his civil rights record. He was then attacked by Senator Cory Booker over a comment Biden made about, quote, that kid wearing a hoodie may very well be the next poet laureate and not a gangbanger, end quote. But Cory Booker then attacks him over the usage of the term hoodie. This is some more nonsense. Okay? And go back and watch, go back and listen to the show that I did last week where I broke this down and talked about Cory Booker. All right, so if we look at the, I want to squeeze in one more article here, then we'll go to the, this next clip, right? Look at the article from the Washington Post, February 2nd, 2019. It's entitled, I Am Who I Am, Kamala Harris, daughter of Indian and Jamaican immigrants, defines herself simply as American, right? So on page 4 of this article, because I printed it out, it's 7 pages. On page 4 of this article, let's back up to page 3. It talks about how many people thought she was African American and didn't know that her mother was Indian, from India. And it talks about how her lack of public focus on her heritage has left many people, even in her home state of California, unaware of her multiracial background. Most people assume she's African American, and even some friends did not know she was also Indian. So they talk about, they quoted Matthew Davis, a San Francisco lawyer and classmate of Kamala Harris's at the University of California, Hastings College of Law, where they graduated in 1989. He said, I had no idea, quote unquote. He said, quote, even though we were good friends, I never really heard her talk much about her personal life, end quote. Now, her parents were civil rights activists and all that. I understand that. That's fine. And she grew up, learning about Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass. She grew up immersed in black culture. That's true. She talked about how her mother adopted black culture and immersed her and her sister Maya in it. That's true. But it was so Matthew Davis said, even though we were good friends, I never really heard her talk too much about her personal life. Okay. Now, it was only when she was sworn in as district attorney in 2004 in California, 15 years after they graduated from law school, that Matthew Davis learned Kamala Harris was half Indian. He said, quote, she introduced me to her mother, and that was the first time I knew, end quote. He said it was a sense of pride for her, but I didn't get the sense that it was the way she defined herself. Okay. So the article goes on to talk about how even now, Kamala Harris still doesn't seem fully at ease discussing her personal heritage. So she did an interview with Good Morning America. Good Morning America comes on Monday through Friday, seen by millions of people. This was right after she announced she was running for president. Okay. In her first campaign stop after announcing her bid for president on Good Morning America on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day, Kamala Harris appeared on her old Howard University campus to take questions. Howard University, HBCU. The reporter asked her, quote, "You're African American, but you're also Indian American," end quote. She responded, "Indeed." He asked, the reporter, not sure male or female, asked, "How do you describe yourself?" She responded, "Did you read my book? How do I describe myself? I describe myself as a proud American." So this is an opportunity to say you're a proud Black American. You're a Black American. You can say African American, but people dispute that. I'm not getting to that. I don't have enough time to get to that. Dealing with immigrants coming here being classified as African American, I don't have time to get to that argument. But this is how she chose to describe herself. She said it with a smile, but with an quote unquote end of conversation firmness. Read this entire article. Okay, I don't have time to get this is 7 pages. I don't have time to get into all this. "I am who I am. Kamala Harris, daughter of Indian and Jamaican immigrants, defines herself simply as American." That's the title. So what some people have been saying for months, they're not saying they don't like her. Personally, I don't know her, but personally, I like her. She's sharp. She's smart. Wouldn't want to be prosecuted by her. But this is a question. This is a legitimate question people ask. Wait a second. It seems like she's just Black when it's convenient. When you had an opportunity to talk about reparations on the debate stage, when you had an opportunity to talk about your Black agenda that you said you had when you talked to Tom Joyner on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, when you're talking to Black people, or when you were talking on the Breakfast Club talking to Black people, you wanted to talk about a 40-year-old busing policy, and busing has failed, and most African Americans were against busing. So we'll talk about this some more next week and in subsequent weeks. We're running out of time here, okay? This next clip we'll get to. The other clip, how much time we have, John? 3 minutes. All right, let's go to this next clip. Let's get into this. You got it queued up? Second clip 2? Let's go to this clip 2.
It was hurtful to hear you talk about the reputations of two United States.
And you've been not a supporter of civil rights, you've been a leader of it as chair of the Congressional Black Caucus and others. How do you deal with the questions about Joe Biden, your candidate, not willing to apologize for the boy-son statement that I tried to get him to deal with last week in South Carolina, and his response to Kamala Harris that in effect said that he did not want to see the federal court intervene in local decisions? I mean, how does that reconcile with the civil rights movement for the last 50 years that needed the federal government to step in to protect people against local state and local county governments that may have been doing things that are discriminatory?
Well, thank you, Reverend Al, for that question. It gives me a chance to really clean it up a little bit. First of all, the vice president's record is very clear that he's always supported the federal government stepping in when states, local governments, or municipalities or school boards acted in a manner that justified or enacted segregation. And he was for busing in those instances. But the bigger question, and I think what everybody alluded to, was the old states' rights arguments. He has never been for states' rights. So whether it was the Voting Rights Act that he extended for 25 years that let the federal government sue states and counties and voter offices that discriminated, whether it was the legislation that he passed so that the federal government, the Department of Justice, could sue police departments that had a pattern and practice of violating people's civil rights, especially minorities.
Okay, guys, we ran out of time. Watch that full clip. Now, this is from June 29th, 2019. Okay? June 29th, 2019. This is after Al Sharpton interviewed Biden, and Biden told him face to face and explained this whole thing. So why is Sharpton still talking about boy and segregationists? Because that's not even the context in which Biden was talking about. The name of this clip, Biden, Sanders, Surrogates Talk Candidates Debate Performance. This is from PoliticsNation. It's at msnbc.com. The full clip, about 13 minutes. That was Representative Cedric Richmond, who is the co-chair of Joe Biden's campaign. Watch that full clip. We'll get into this next week because you have people who are not really telling the truth and totally mischaracterizing what we're saying to score political points. And we have to ask the question, well, what's behind all this? If you disagree with some policies of Biden, some votes that took place. That's fine. Let's deal with that. But we can't mischaracterize what people are saying. Just like at the same time, we can't say I'm against people attacking Kamala Harris, saying she was not born in this country or saying she was not black. She is black. But there's a difference between being black and black consciousness. Clarence Thomas is black. There's no doubt about that. But he doesn't think black. 9:10 AM, the Superstation. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. The African History Network show. I'm Michael Imhotep. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Wakanda forever. Stay tuned with Pastor Mo. We'll talk to you next week. Peace.